pretend for a moment that there is such a thing as human rights. And let's be vague about them. Let's say they are life, liberty, and property. And let us pretend also that these rights are antecedent to government. John F. Kennedy says it so well in his inaugural address. He says, "The rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God." And of course, he's just echoing our President Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal, and they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And if you prefer not to talk about God, you could read John Locke's Second Treatise, and though he uses Bible verses, he reasons from nature. So you can prefer nature to God if you want. Now the question is, and after 1776, after we declare independence from England, and after we've started our first government, government under the Articles of Confederation, we decide to restart, to reboot. And so we create this thing called the Constitution. And Alexander Hamilton, who has a musical, I was going to do some rapping, but I'm not going to, he asked this question: whether societies of men are really capable of establishing good government from reflection and choice. This is in Federalist number 1. And his answer, of course, is yes. This is that moment in history where a group gets together and decides to do this. The election of 1800 is even more exciting because now we have one of the first times that one group leaves office and another group comes in, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, peacefully. But there's another question. It's the questions that the Catalans are asking of Spain, that Scotland has asked and voted on with Great Britain, that the Quebecois have done with Canada. And it's this question: can we separate? South Sudan has asked that question and has answered it unpleasantly, as Bangladesh has of Pakistan. Well, you know, of course, our story. We asked that question ourselves. The South says that they would like to unratify or de-ratify the Constitution. Abraham Lincoln, before the war, says, no, you can't, and he argues that you can't do that. The argument, by the way, is not very persuasive. I don't think I could run you through that argument in another video. But we find, of course, that it's not all reflection and choice. Abraham Lincoln says no. And we have a bloody civil war. 500,000 people die. And we realize, this country is in fact indivisible. We also free the slaves. That's a byproduct of it. But it's what Abraham Lincoln says, of course, that's so important to our story. Abraham Lincoln says, 74 years ago, isn't that Father Abraham from the Old Testament. Oh, 7 years ago our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, 100 years later, MLK, in 1963, the March on Washington, in front of the Temple of Lincoln, right, that amazing temple where Lincoln sits and looks over the pool. MLK gives a speech, the I Have a Dream speech. And in that speech, he has this wonderful part that he says. Let me make sure I can get you to read this. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, this is such an important, and I'm going to call it a myth, but I don't want to offend anyone. I'm not saying it's not true. You can have true myths, but this is definitely the myth of America. This idea, and you see it from Jefferson, and Abraham Lincoln uses it, and MLK uses it even more beautifully, I think. And it's this myth that we are a group of people who've come together, who've consented to government of the people, by the people, and for the people, as Abraham Lincoln says. And this is what it means to be American. Now, when we think about this, we, of course, have to go way back. Before there was an America, when the English first landed on this shore, we have a thing called the Mayflower Compact. This is the Pilgrims, right? The Puritans who came, actually they were separatists, but listen to what they say, and I'll read it to you, just make sure you can see it. Okay. We, whose names are underwritten, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation and the furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws. Do you hear that? Such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time, as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, and to which we promise all due submission and obedience. So we're going to make these laws, and they're going to be laws that we're going to make mistakes, because we're going to make them from time to time. We're not going to be perfect. And we'll do them as shall be thought most meet and convenient. Most thought by whom, you might ask? I would argue we whose names are underwritten. This is the beginning of American democracy. This is the beginning of the Constitution, combining ourselves together into a civil body politic. Now, the strange thing, this is 1620. This is before John Locke is born, before Hobbes has written his Leviathan. We were already doing it here. Now, you might say, well, Mr. Horn, this is just a rogue band of folk who land and then will be subsumed under Massachusetts and be nothing? And the answer is, of course. But it happened right at the beginning. This is our scripture. Now, it's this scripture, this myth of America, that we have rights and governments are instituted to support that, and we give our consent to this government, that I find so important, and this is why I'm an American, and proud to be an American, and proud to pledge my allegiance to America, to the flag. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, I'm not sure I buy this myth, and I'm going to read to you someone who does not buy this myth. Let me read to you some words, and I'm not going to tell you who it is yet. I'll tell you in just a second. So, here it is. Ready? It's going to be confusing, so you're going to have to follow. Around 1776, certain important people in the English colonies made a discovery that would prove enormously useful for the next 200 years. They found that by creating a nation, a symbol, a legal unity called the United States of America. So this is that myth, that by creating this myth, this is a certain important people, they could take over the land's profits and political power from the favorites of the British Empire. See the new boss same as the old boss. In the process, they could hold back a number of potential rebellions and create a consensus of popular support for the rule of a new, privileged leadership. Now, I'm going to finish this, and here we go. This is, of course, by Howard Zinn, the popular writer, People's History of the United States, and here's what he says. When we look at the American Revolution this way, it was the work of genius, and I always add, it was the work of evil genius, and the Founding Fathers deserve the odd tribute that Darth Vader and the Death Star also are owed. They deserve the odd tribute they have received over the centuries. They have created the most effective system of national control devised in modern times, and showed future generations of leaders like Richard Nixon and George W. Bush and Obama. We won't even talk about Donald Trump. The leaders, and showed future generations of leaders the advantage of combining paternalism with command. Now, I actually saw Howard Zinn in person, and someone asked him, this was right when Obama was being elected, I think it was right before the election. They said, do you think Obama, are you excited about Obama becoming president? And he looked and he said, Obama will be no different from George W. Bush. Now, the problem, I think, with attacking the myth, and someone asked another question I wish I wanted to ask, whether he would accept me inserting the word evil into genius, but I forgot to ask him the question. He died the next year. But the question that someone asked him, someone came up and said, I teach kindergarten, and how should I present George Washington? And I'll have to say he did not answer that question. Because, of course, of this, and to me, this is the myth. I'm sorry, but the myth of the United States requires us not to turn a blind eye to the evils of America, to the sores, the scars, the bleeding open wounds of American history. But we still argue and say this is the United States of history, of America, this country that in the 20th century defeated the Japanese and the Germans, defeated the Soviet Union, and became the most important country, and then needs a reason to continue? I don't know. That's a great question. We'll answer it next time, perhaps, when we talk about nationalism.